We're going to get started with the game. This is a game that I think all of you will just, you're not going to have any problem with this. I'm going to show you some pictures of some famous people, and all I want you to do is shout out the name of who that famous person is. Like I said, most of you will probably get these with no problem at all. Let's see the first famous person. Okay, guesses, who is that? Did someone say Iron Man? Yes, who is it, Heather? Robert Downey Jr. How many of you guys knew that one? Okay, most of you. All right, let's see this next one. Who's that? Oprah. We all know Oprah. Yeah. All right, next one. Brad Pitt. Yes, okay. Jen's clearly a fan. She knew that one right away. Julia Roberts, yes. And then we've got one more, I believe. Who's this? Tom Hanks, yeah. Okay, so most of you had no problem with this, and I wasn't really trying to see if you knew who these people were or not, because I thought you would know. What I want to do, actually, is I want to just, maybe you noticed, some of these pictures maybe were dated a little bit. Did you guys notice that maybe these were younger versions of these famous people? These were actually taken 20 years ago. Every single one of these pictures were taken 20 years ago. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you the 20-year-old 2002 picture next to the 2022 picture, and I just want you to, see what you notice. All right, let's see. All right. Yeah, that looks a little more like Iron Man, right? Yeah. All right, next one. Okay, Oprah. Oprah still looks like Oprah. Yeah. Next one. Brad. Brad's got maybe a little more gray going on here, right? Next one. Julia still looks great. And then finally, we got Tom. Okay, what do you guys notice about every single one of those pictures? They have aged. Every single one of them have gotten old. And the sad thing is, if they're getting old, what does that mean about you guys? You're getting old too. I mean, if you can remember 20 years ago, you've gotten old. But see, when it comes to aging, it's one of those things that you can quickly notice and pick up in other people, but sometimes, like the day-to-day, month-to-month, even year-to-year, you just don't necessarily see it very much. You go in maybe it's a family reunion, maybe it's getting together with some friends that you haven't seen in a few years, and it's so easy to notice that other people have aged. You're like, well, a little thinner, a little grayer, right? Maybe they've gained a little bit more weight. You notice these things really quickly in other people, but typically the day-to-day, you don't really notice yourself aging. It's not until, if you're like me, you're walking down the street one day and you look in a window and you're like, who's that creepy dude with like wrinkles and thinning hair staring back? No way, that's me. It's me that I'm staring at. That can't be me, right? It's not just aging that we typically see in other people, but may not necessarily see in ourselves. Have you ever been around impatient people before? These are the people that when you're at the light and it turns green, they immediately are honking their horn like, get a move on. They're the ones that are riding behind you and right on your bumper until you scoot over and then they zoom by. Or in the grocery store, they're the person that's behind you, looking at the watch, fidgeting, mumbling about how slow the person is, checking people out. And the whole time, what are you thinking? You're thinking, oh my goodness, just have a little bit of patience. But what about you? What about when you are pulling your hair out because coupon lady has just like wasted a minute and 42 seconds of your life getting her little coupons out? What about you when you're just at that light and you're wanting to scream at the person in front of you, just go? You're not impatient, right? In those moments, you're not impatient. You're just in a hurry. You're just in a rush. I mean, it's not that you're impatient. That's right. We don't necessarily see these things in us, but we can easily see it in other people. Or how about this one? Have you ever noticed maybe being a little annoyed, surprised, frustrated when you're around judgmental people? Have you ever been around people that you're just hanging out and it almost seems like every single person that walks by, they've got some little like snarky comment like, oh, I was wearing that. And you're just like, whoa, wow, that's super judgmental. Or, you're hanging out in a group and maybe half the group goes over here and, someone circles up and say, oh, I heard it. And they're just really judgmental. And you're like, wow, what's the deal? And isn't it true that there's something that rises up in you that makes you really want to like go and share your judgmental thoughts about that judgmental person? I mean, your insightful thoughts with someone else about that judgmental person. Like, there's just certain things, right, that it's really easy to notice in other people, but maybe there's a shadow in our own lives that we just, for whatever reason, just likes to hide a little bit. We've been in a series for really since last November. It's a staggered series. We haven't been in it all year long. But in November, we started a series called Heart Disease and How to Break Free. And we looked at 4 enemies that are trying to really just wage war against your heart. What they're trying to do is really cause death and destruction in your relationships. And so back in November, we looked at how really this idea of guilt when it's not handled the way that God desires it to be handled, can lead to shame, it can lead to withdrawal, and ends up hurting relationships. And so what do? We confess. We confess and we seek restitution. That's the health regimen in order to face down guilt. And then in the spring, we looked at the second of our 2 enemies that are waging war in the heart, and that is, you guys remember? Anger, very good. We all know it. We've all seen it. We've all experienced it. That's one that we can see in ourselves as well as other people. And the solution is, well, we need to forgive. Today we're really going to start doing the deep dive into the 3rd enemy of your heart. And it's one that is easy to see and spot in other people. But for whatever reason, we typically have a hard time seeing in ourselves. And if you've read the sign up here, our little slide, you already know what it is. It's greed. And you may even hear that, and you may have even sat down today thinking, I don't know if I really deal with greed. Why? Because greed is one of those things that just loves to hang out in the shadows. It's one of those things that as a pastor, somebody who actually gets an opportunity to hear about what other people are struggling with more than the average person, I think. Not once in my life has anyone ever come up to me, looked me straight in the eye and said, you know what, Jonathan? I'm just, my issue is I'm just greedy. Like, I'm just struggling a lot with greed. I've had a long list of other things. I'm struggling with an addiction. I'm struggling with anger. I'm struggling with lust. I'm struggling with, this whole idea of forgiveness just is so foreign to me because of all the damage that has been done. I mean, the list goes on and on. But no time in my pastoral career has anyone ever looked at me and said, you know what, Jonathan? My problem is I'm just dealing with greed. So, in order to be transparent, and in order to take the first step on this, I want to look at every single one of you right in the eye, and I want to let you know something about me. I can be extremely greedy. I have to say it. I have to say it, otherwise it wants to hang out in the shadows. And if I'm not engaged in certain health regimens, greed can just creep in and steal the life right out of me. Now, I can hide that greed quite easily, and maybe you can relate to this. I will say things like, well, I'm just a saver, right? That's who I am. I like to save. I'm just careful with my money and my possessions. I'm a planner. Planning's a good thing. Saving's a good thing. What I'm doing is I'm just making sure that, my financial future, it's in a safe place because I don't want to necessarily have my kids have to take on responsibility that these are the things that I tell myself. How many of you have ever been in that similar situation, just telling yourself, it's not really greed. These things that I'm doing are a good thing. So what I'd like to do is put a spotlight on maybe some of our greedy tendencies. I'm going to give you a list of greedy things that greedy people do. And what I want you to do is just put a mental check mark. If this is something that you think you struggle with at times or have dealt with at times, just put a little mental checklist like, yep, okay, check mark, I've done that. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, but we're going to go ahead and go through them. You'll see them on the screen behind me. So what do greedy people do? Greedy people talk a lot and worry a lot about money. Have you ever found yourself worrying about money a time or two? Yeah. Greedy people are not cheerful givers. Now, understand, they may give, and they may give quite often, but there's not this enthusiasm and joy behind it. It's more of okay, I kind of feel obligated. I think I should, so that I'll go with it. That's what greedy people oftentimes do. Greedy people are reluctant to share. They oftentimes think it's mine, so you get your own. I'm not going to share mine. Greedy people are poor losers. Greedy people quibble over insignificant sums of money. Greedy people talk as if they have just enough to get by. This month, it's tight, shoestring budget. I don't know if we're going to make it, right? Greedy people often create a culture of secrecy around them. Greedy people won't let others forget what they've done for them. Hey, remember last month? Yeah, that was pretty awesome to me, wasn't it? Yeah. Greedy people are reluctant to express gratitude. Greedy people aren't content with what they have. There's this constant, it's nice, but the nicer versions come out, and that would be really great to have the nicer version. Greedy people attempt to control people with their money. Greedy people can give all manner of excuses not to give. If Have you ever found yourself doing this? Like you knew there was this prompting, I should give. You're like, no. And you just talk yourself out of it really, really easily, really quickly. Greedy people, what do? When greedy people give, they have these strings attached to their giving. They feel almost as though the recipient owes them because, well, they were so generous to give in the first place. All right, moment of truth. How many of you have maybe checked at least a box or two? Anyone? Yeah, me too. Absolutely. In fact, maybe some of you are feeling slightly, exposed. Maybe there's a little bit of shame and guilt that's creeping in, and you're thinking to yourself, hey, what's going on in my heart? Why is this making me feel uncomfortable? Well, it's because greed loves to hang out in the darkness, loves to grow in darkness, and we've got all kinds of excuses to cover over them. In fact, some of you may be even pushing back and saying, I'd like to be greedy. I mean, if I could be greedy, I would like to be greedy, but I can't be greedy because I'm poor. Like, it would be wonderful to be, but I'm so poor, I can't be greedy. Here's the thing. Greed is not a condition of how much money you have in your bank account. It's a condition of your heart. I think we've all encountered, and if you haven't yet, you probably will encounter greedy rich people, and you'll encounter greedy poor people. What do we know? Greed is a condition of the heart. And this is why Jesus tackles it head on. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and turn to Luke chapter 12. This series, we're going to be looking at this parable that Jesus shares. We're just going to kind of introduce it this week, and we're going to use it a bit at a time over the next month. But he starts to tell this story actually because someone brings up an interesting challenge to Jesus, or at least he asked Jesus for a request. And as soon as this individual asked Jesus to settle this dispute when it comes to money, this is his response. Notice what verse 15 says. It says, "Then he said to them, 'Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions.'" He says, watch out, watch out. I don't know if you've ever been diagnosed with a heart issue, or you've known people who have been diagnosed with heart issues, but what do doctors say? They say, watch out, watch out, watch out against trans fats. Watch out, protect yourself against saturated fats. Make sure you're not eating foods that are too high in cholesterol. Watch out, make sure that you're exercising. Jesus, like a good doctor, is saying, watch out, protect yourself against this heart disease of greed. And you might even think, wow, why is this such a big deal? Greed is like the coconut oil for your spiritual life. Here's what I mean by this. So how many of you have ever heard that coconut oil, well, that's the heart-healthy oil. Go ahead, cook with the heart-healthy oil. Sure, maybe, but the verdict is still out on that one. What they've seen is that coconut oil, in every test that they run, actually does increase your cholesterol. So maybe it's not as heart healthy as they're saying it is. This is what we do with greed. What do we do? We mask it and we say it's actually a good thing. And this is why it's in my life. We'll play games and we'll say things like, "Wow, no, that's not greed over here. I'm remodeling the kitchen and the house because I wanted to use it for ministry. Like, I can't invite people over for a Bible study in my home if it's outdated. Like, no one can study God's word in an outdated living room. That's why the remodel is taking place." Or maybe we say things like, "Well, no, that's not greed. I'm simply enjoying the hard work that has actually paid off from a lifetime of blood, sweat, and tears." Like, if they had worked hard, if they had, kept their nose to the grindstone, well, then they would be able to just kick back and enjoy. I'm just enjoying the fruits of my labor. We'll say things like, "Hey, listen, just because I don't have a silly grin on my face each time I give doesn't mean it's a heart issue. I just don't want to look like an idiot with a big grin on my face." Okay, but are you feeling joyful about that giving, or are you doing it reluctantly? We'll say things like, "Okay, yeah, no, I'm writing a check that I was compelled to give to charity, and yeah, no, it's true, I'm erasing one of the zeros that I originally wrote on there to make that a little bit more of a number, but I'm still writing a check. Like, here's the thing, I'm still writing the check, so I can't be greedy just because I erased one of the zeros." Ever found yourself making those types of excuses? We like to say it's a good thing. Notice how Jesus finishes up this sentence, though, or at least this verse. He says, watch out, right? Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. And then here he says this: life does not consist and an abundance of possessions. Why does he say this? I think he says this because he's trying to address a lie that we buy into really, really quickly. And the lie is that our stuff equals life. And even as you're hearing that, you're probably processing like, I don't believe that lie. Life is so much more than consumption. Life is more than, just having the latest and greatest. I know life's more than stuff. But what if I were to take your cell phone from you? Like right now, your really expensive cell phone. How would you feel about that? Some of you, you would almost go through this drug withdrawal, symptoms. Like you get fidgety and be like, oh man, but I got to check my text. There's all kinds of responses that I need. Oh my goodness, I'm going to go into this social environment, and how will I ignore people that I don't want to talk to if I don't have my cell phone on me and look really busy, right? You might start having panic attacks because it just feels weird that your phone's not connected to you. Anyone? No people like that? Not you. Certainly not you guys. Not you guys. But other people may respond that way. Why? Because somehow stuff has become their life. And maybe another way to look at it is if you ever kind of get bent out of shape when people start talking about you giving or you sharing, or you get kind of bent out of shape about someone saying something about, maybe you should be a little bit more generous, or any of those things. If it bothers you a little bit, is it possible that it bothers you because, it feels like they're messing with your life? But they're not really messing with your life. They're just talking about your stuff. But somehow, you've started to think that stuff is life. Now, I'm actually far more familiar with this than I'd like to admit. A while ago, the home computer that we had as a family, it was this old laptop, and we had it for a lot of years, and it was going really well. But then it stopped taking a charge, and the only reason you really have a laptop is because you need to move it around, and just wouldn't hold a charge. And on top of that, when you would click on the simplest of documents, it would take like a half hour for it to open, and we're not even talking online stuff. This is just like the Word document. Like, oh my goodness. So we knew something was wrong with this computer. It's probably not going to last very long. And so we had the tough decision of, okay, we're gonna spend some money on a new laptop. And my wife, she's really good at finding bargains. And so she found this. It's called an Apple Air. Is that the one that you've got too, Josh? MacBook Air. MacBook Air. So it was a pretty good deal. But anytime you're buying Apple products, you're still paying way too much. So even though it was like a good deal, it was still expensive. So we had that wonderful out of the box experience that Apple provides, and immediately, you know what we did as parents? We started setting the rules about the computer for the kids. Rule number 1, no beverages anywhere near this computer. 6 feet radius, no water, nothing around this computer. Second rule, roughhousing? Oh, no, not around this computer. You want to throw the ball? You go outside and you throw the ball outside. You want to wrestle? Go upstairs. Don't be around the computer. If you want to use the computer, rule number 3, it's not this one. Don't even touch it with your grubby little hands. That computer that's not long for this life, that's your computer now. You can do homework and those type of things on that computer. Honestly, if you come into the room and you see the computer being used, best case scenario right here, all we need you to do is just slowly back out of the room. Just leave. We'll ring a bell when you need to come back in. That's how we're going to use this. So that was the rules. So imagine my surprise when, no kidding, the very next week, my wife says, I found a dent on our computer. It's like, you found a dent? Yeah, right in the front, about 3 inches from the glowing Apple logo. You found a dent? Now, I knew it wasn't me. I hadn't even used the thing. I look at my wife. I know it's not her because she's far more careful with that thing than even I am. So it came down to 4 suspects. You know who those suspects were. And so the witch hunt was on. The witch hunt was on. Who did it? They're going to pay. I'm going to make them really earn this. This dent is going to be paid back with their blood, sweat, and tears. That's why. Why? Because guess what? Stuff equals life, right? I started buying into this lie. Well, stuff equals life, and you damage the stuff, and this hurts my life now, and so I'm going to make you pay. Now, I know some of you are wondering, so what was the result of the witch hunt? completely fruitless. Like, absolutely, completely fruitless. Because by the time I started interrogating these guys, it was, no, not, I mean, maybe him, but not me. And then it like shifted to this whole like, Dad, I didn't even know we had a new computer. I've never seen that thing before in my life. Like, this is clearly not me. Like, so it was, and I'm not salty about it because I know that stuff doesn't equal life. But we've all probably been there. Maybe put a little too much emphasis on stuff from time to time. This is something that we do, and we've got to be aware of it because what greed oftentimes communicates is, what you got to do is you got to protect your stuff in order to protect your life. In fact, the way that we do this is we have a long list of what ifs. You ever have that long list of what ifs? Some of the what ifs that we have are, what if it breaks? Like, what if it breaks? So I'm gonna really have to make sure it's safe. Or what if it gets lost? What if there's not enough? What if I don't get my fair share? We have these long lists of what ifs. What if they have more? And I think we can continue with this list, but really it comes down to one what if that underpins all the other what ifs. You know what the major what if is that is really stirring our greed and continuing us to just view our stuff as life? It comes down to this. What if God is not able or willing to take care of me? What if God isn't actually going to take care of me? And I think it's probably for most of us, it's a bit more specific. And I think what it is it comes down to what if God, because we know that God can take care of us. We know that he has the ability and he has the heart and he will take care of us. But it really comes down to what if he's not willing to take care of me the way that it fits my lifestyle? Like, what if he doesn't take care of me in the style and the fashion that I want him to take care of me? And so what do? Because we're not really sure if he's going to. We shoulder that burden. And we go into it and say, well, I guess I got to get more. I guess I got to get more. I guess I got to get more. Why? Because we've got a long list of what ifs. But you already know the problem with this. The problem is that as soon as you're done with that column of what ifs that you've solved everything, we just start another column of what ifs. What if I lose my job? What if China invades Taiwan and all those precious microchips that run our economy are now in the hands of commies? Right? That's a huge what if. What if that happens? So we've got all these what ifs, don't we? And so again, we shoulder this responsibility of, okay, well, I guess I'll take care. But that's going to create strain, isn't it? Not only is it going to put pressure and strain on your life, it puts strain on your relationships with other people. We've all heard stories of families who have been ripped and torn apart because they argued and fought about stuff that has a lifespan of maybe a few years, but they were willing to allow it to destroy a relationship. And this is not even to mention the strain and struggle that this will put on your relationship with God. And here's why this is such an important one. Think about the foundation of your relationship with God. It begins with what? Faith. Like, your relationship begins with faith and trust in God. But if you don't have the faith and trust in God that he's going to meet your needs, whether it's the way that you want him to meet your needs or not, you see how that might actually create some issues with your relationship with God? So Jesus decides to launch into this parable. We're not going to finish this parable, but we're going to introduce it today. He says, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. Have you ever been there before? Maybe not the farming aspect. Some of you have done some farming before, but have you ever had this experience where the ground that you've been plowing and tilling and planting is like, oh my goodness, hey, wow, this is an abundant harvest. Maybe it was a bonus that you weren't expecting. It's like, I guess I worked hard and they're honoring my hard work with a bonus. Fantastic. Or maybe it's one of those situations where someone buys you something that you were saving up for, and so now you have all this extra money. Like, oh man, that's really great. Or someone just blesses you financially. Maybe it's the hard work that you put in and year out, and all of a sudden you look back and you're like, I had hardly anything several years ago, but now, my goodness, I have an abundance here. Or maybe it's a situation where you have an abundance because of billing hours were just different this month, and you thought you were going to have a certain amount and more came in, and now you have an abundance. This is where he's at. This is where this landowner is at. He now has an abundance. And as you read this, in our 21st century mind, we probably wouldn't necessarily go in the same direction that the first audience would go. The first audience would hear this, and there would be this understanding that, yeah, probably hard work went into that abundance, but it certainly was not the only variable. Like, there were other variables involved, because just because you have hard work, if you're a first century farmer, there are way too many things outside of your control, right? You can't control the weather. You can't control how much water is coming out of the sky. I mean, maybe you can dig some ditches for some irrigation, but not like we do today. When it comes to pests, when it comes to diseases on your crop, I mean, there was almost no control over those things. And so the first century audience would have understood that although, yes, hard work probably helped with this abundant harvest, there's this understanding that, no, this blessing is really from the Creator. This is from God. But there doesn't seem to necessarily be a sense that this guy understands it. Why? Because he's greedy. And greedy men and women rarely recognize that the blessings that they have in life are due to the fact that they've got a good God who's given them more than they need. Instead, greedy men and women, what do? What we do is say, oh, I've actually earned this. Now, how have you earned it? Well, maybe it was because, well, I worked really hard. I earned the extra that I have. I've earned it, or maybe I found it, or I was at the right place at the right time, or I'm smarter and more clever than other people, or I'm bigger and I'm stronger and I was able to take it, and so now it's mine. I've earned this. And so he continues. So the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. So he's got this huge dilemma, doesn't he? It's a massive dilemma. I've got so much extra, I don't even know what to do with it. And we all feel really bad for this guy. It's like, oh man, how's he going to solve this one? Such a huge problem. You've got so much extra. Probably not. None of us are probably feeling too bad for him. Notice what he says. I have no place to store my crops. Love that word store. You know what this is? That word store is farmer talk for save. We could probably go ahead and put the word save in here. I have no place to save my crops. You and I have more experience probably with saving than we do with storing. But here in this story, interchangeable. Saving, storing, same thing. Where it gets really interesting is I think we could probably put a different word in there and it would mean the exact same thing. Let's read it this way. I have no place to hoard my crops, my stuff, my money. I have no place to hoard it. Quick show of hands. How many of you, honestly, you feel just a slight sense of discomfort that I've just described saving and storing as hoarding? Anyone? Yeah, totally. Me too. And I debated whether or not even to use that word. Because what does it do? It reveals the greed in my own heart. Because I love to save. I was reminded of this a couple months ago. I got a text. My wife and I both, we got a text from my sister-in-law, my brother's wife, and it was a relatively long text. Here was the essence of it. She was saying that there was a need that needed to be met and was asking if we wanted to help meet that financial need. But as I was reading the text, I had a few red flags. Because there are times where I've been caught up in people, maybe trying to scam me before through email and even phone calls at the church. And so there's just a few red flags. You're like, is this legit or not? Now, I haven't had a whole lot of experience with, I guess, compromised cell phones and text and people trying to do fraudulent activity through, text messages. So I was like, I don't know, cyber crimes are, on the rise. So maybe this is a new thing. So in my mind, like, I don't know if this is legit or not, because the first red flag was the fact that my sister-in-law, she's a bright and intelligent woman, and there was just some major grammatical errors and some poor punctuation. And so maybe talk to text just was failing her, but I'm reading it thinking, this is like not even proper English at times. Like, what is this? And if you've ever had one of those emails, you're like, oh yeah, no, some other country, someone's trying to scam me. Ever have one of those? That was red flag number one. Red flag number two was the fact that the last name of this person who was in need was not mentioned. They just said, hey, Jennifer and her family are in need of some support and help. And I was like, okay, yeah, no, I know a Jennifer that she knows, and maybe that's a Jennifer, but don't we all know a Jennifer? Like, everyone knows a Jennifer. Like, in our church alone, we've got like 15 Jens or Jennifers. So if you're going to use a name to like, yeah, Jennifer, still, oh, no, I got to help Jennifer out, even though it may not be. So there's no last name. That was like the second red flag. Third red flag was at the very end of the text, she said, okay, if you want to help out, just Venmo or Vox me the money. Now, if you're not familiar with those apps, Venmo and Vox, it's a really convenient way over this app to be able to share money, and there's absolutely no way that fraudulent activity could ever be done on Venmo or Vox. So, I mean, it's such a secure way to share money. Anyway, so those are like my three major red flags. I'm like, if her phone has been compromised, I can't just like text her back and be like, hey, is this you? Because they'll be like, yeah, it's me, send me the money. It's like, oh gosh, I don't know what to do. So I decided to text my brother. I was like, hey, I got this text from your wife. Is this her? And about an hour later, he sends this reply back. He says, you didn't know my wife was a Nigerian princess? And just leaves it at that. Like, that's all he gave me. And if you're not sure why that's funny, you haven't had email over the last like 25 years. So it's a common scam. So he left it hanging. And the longer I was waiting for the proper reply, I'm thinking, well, it must be fraudulent. It must not be from her, because he would just, he's making jokes about it. And there was a part of me that wanted it to be fraudulent, one, so I can play the hero. Like, hey man, your phone's totally been hacked. You got to get on this, and so I can help them. The second reason was because if, as I looked at my finances, well, if it was fraudulent, then I wouldn't be compelled to either help or tell them, sorry, we'd like to, but we can't. Like, I wouldn't have to have that awkward conversation. About an hour later, he texts me back, and this is what he says. He says, yes, it's from her. She's sending it to people that know Jenny and are generous. It's like, okay, mystery solved. Mystery solved. It's legit. But then this raised a deeper mystery. And the deeper mystery is, who is this person that he is referring to as generous? Because it certainly wasn't me at that time. Right? Greed had gripped my heart very hard. Let me explain what I mean by this. This is 2 months ago. 2 months ago, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. It was a harvest that I did not earn, I did not deserve. We didn't find. It wasn't like I was digging a hole and like, oh my gosh, cash. Like, some money was given to the family, and we didn't need it. Again, we didn't earn it, we didn't deserve it. It just showed up in our lives. And where did my mind go with that? My mind was like, oh, sweet. I get to spend it on me. That's where my thought went. That's where my mind went. And when we think about this story, when we look at this parable, my heart and my mind goes almost every single time in the same direction that this man goes. And we're going to look at the direction that he ends up taking next week. But here's a little spoiler alert. It looks a lot like hoarding. It looks a lot like hoarding. And the reality is that this man was blessed by God. He had an abundant harvest that he didn't really earn. He really didn't deserve. And the reality is that he had extra, and you and I have extra. Like, we have all been given extra, haven't we? If you don't feel like you've been given extra, all you need to do is take a drive to Eastern Kentucky this afternoon. And all you need to do is observe those folks who have lost everything. And then you can come home and you can look at all that you have and you can realize, wow, we have extra. All you need to do is take a trip to a developing country, see what real poverty looks like, come back home, and then realize, wow, we have a lot of extra. And so the challenge that I want to give you, and it's a challenge that I've been working on myself, the challenge is this. It's an easy challenge. Like, it's one that you can start right here, right now, today, and I hope and pray that you will engage it every single day this week as often as you think about it. Super easy, but at the same time, it might be really uncomfortable. The challenge is this. Just ask yourself a question. In fact, I would even go further and say, make this a prayer, where you're talking to God, asking him a question. And here's the question. Lord, what do you want me to do with my extra? Just begin asking yourself that question. Lord, what do you want me to do with my extra? I know some of you are like, yeah, but did you ask that question when you found that the text was legit? I did, actually. I did. And the Lord told me, buy a new pair of shoes. Like, that's what I want you to do. Okay, no. I didn't. What I did do is I did ask that question. And what was interesting is I really sensed that that God was asking me two questions in reply. Like I asked him one, Lord, what do you want me to do with my extra? And the first question he asked back to me was, well, Jonathan, do you need it? Do you need the extra? Okay, all my needs are met and 90% of my wants. No, I don't need it. And then the follow-up question was, well, do you know anyone that does need it? Yeah, I know somebody that needs it. And so it was then that I realized, okay, maybe the extra that had been given to me, the ground of a certain rich man, actually had a generous harvest. Maybe what God had blessed me with was not actually intended for me, but it was intended for somebody else. And so we got on Venmo, and we went ahead and sent the money right after I bought the new shoes, right? That's when, no. So here's the challenge. Starting today, maybe right now, just start asking that question in your mind. Lord, what do you want me to do with my extra? Can we practice that right now together as a church? Can we just say it out loud together, maybe on two? Can we do this? All right, here we go. 1, 2. Lord, what do you want me to do with my extra? Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for being a generous God. Every single one of us in this room are recipients of your generosity. Father, we're recipients of financial generosity and abundance. We're recipients of health and healing. We're recipients of relationships and new mercies that you give us every single day. Father, more than anything, though, we are recipients of your grace and your forgiveness that is given to us freely through the sacrifice, through the resurrection of your Son, Jesus. Father, that is what really draws our heart to be generous ourselves. In the sight of all that you give us, Father, would you help us just to be able to begin hearing from you the answer to that question. Lord, what do you want us to do with our extra? I pray this in your Son Jesus' name. Amen.